There isn't a bigger riddle in recent memory than Vince Young's career. How does a man go from the king of Texas to being pushed out of the NFL in just 5 years? This is the story of the ascent and demise of Vince Young Jr. Like too many young kids in America, Vince Young experienced much of his childhood with his father behind bars. A burglary conviction led to Young's dad missing most of his college career. A four-sport athlete, coming out of high school, Young was the athlete in the early days of the internet. People talked about Vince in Houston more than they did the Texans in 2005. He was the National Player of the Year and the #1 high school prospect. But before we get to all that, we have to get back to Young's upbringing. Growing up in Houston, Young was exposed to local gangs and struggled with a mother fighting substance abuse issues. When your rock is having life problems themselves, you can imagine the difficulties it brings. As Young began to dabble into the negative influences of his life, a huge school fight that landed Young in handcuffs seemed to straighten him out. He had the clarity of what he wanted to do with his life, and he began to grind into the four-sport high school megastar that we know. Along the way, Vince met the man he would call Pops. His Pops just happened to be the most famous person in Houston, former NFL quarterback Steve McNair. McNair took him under his wing. They developed a father-son relationship. McNair would mentor Vince for the rest of his college and NFL career. Vince Young achieved his dream, signing for the home state Texas Longhorns. He redshirted as a freshman and played sparingly until his redshirt sophomore season. When given the reins, Young took off on the field. You could tell from watching him play, he was having fun just dominating the Big 12 as a Longhorn. His dual threat ability made him impossible to stop. Young led Texas to an 11-1 record and their first Rose Bowl victory in the history of the program. Now a redshirt junior, Texas was highly ranked, and Young had a target squarely on his back. It didn't affect Vince in the slightest though, as he had an electric year. He sidearmed passes, maneuvering his way out of trouble and darting improbable throws into the end zone. Defenses just couldn't figure him out as he stampeded on the Big 12. He became the first player to throw for 3,000 yards and run for 1,000 more in a season. Young threw for 26 touchdowns to only 10 interceptions, and his rushing numbers were Madden-like, adding 12 touchdowns on the ground. They ran the table, went 12-0, and headed back to the Rose Bowl, this time for a shot at the national title. Across the field was the most daunting task in college football. The USC Trojans were riding a 34-game winning streak, had the 2004 Heisman winner Matt LEINART as quarterback, and Reggie Bush, the running back that won the 2005 Heisman, over Young in the backfield to deal with. USC was one win away from the first three-peat in the modern era. The game was expected to be one for the ages, and it lived up to every bit of the hype. With 6 minutes and 42 seconds remaining, USC took a 12-point lead. It looked bleak until VY stepped back on the field. He rolled left before cutting all the way back for a long touchdown run, narrowing the lead to just 5 points. It took every ounce of the Longhorns' defense to get the stop on 4th and 1, and from there, the rest is history. Young brought them to 4th and goal on the 5. He dropped back and saw a seam in the D and was gone. Vince ran into the end zone, and the confetti showered him. The 2006 BCS championship belonged to the Texas Longhorns as thousands of fans hit the field, and Young looked over one of the everlasting images in college football. Because of his unique play style, Young was highly regarded coming into the 2006 NFL Draft. He was the first quarterback taken. The Tennessee Titans took a huge chance on Young's potential at number 3 overall. No game showed just what Young could do more than his 21-point comeback as a rookie against the Giants. After a Titans pick 6, Vince Young threw for a touchdown and ran for another to tie the game up in the last seconds. Another interception gave Young a chance to take the Titans up the field for a game-winning field goal. It would turn out to be the best game of Young's NFL career. 250 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, and another touchdown and 70 yards on the ground. The next week, VY outgunned Sheriff Joseph Manning, managing another 14-point comeback over the league's best team in the Colts. Young finished the season by breaking the rookie quarterback rushing record at 552 yards, winning 6 straight games and capping it by taking AP Rookie of the Year honors. After his rookie season, a frenzy of fame surrounded him. He was put on the cover of Madden. The Longhorns retired his number 10 jersey. He was a Pro Bowler as a rookie. On The Tonight Show with Jay Leno, it looked like the young kid from Houston was on the road to an NFL legacy, but there were cracks in his outside life. Vince later admitted that he wanted to retire after his rookie season. He just wasn't having fun. Issues with his head coach Jeff Fisher were prevalent. Fisher didn't want Young as the QB to be tied to for whatever reason, and it caused a rift in the entire organization. The Titans went into the next season, and despite a less than stellar stat line, Young willed them into a wild card spot. Young played badly in his playoff debut as the Titans faltered to the Chargers 17-6. In the 2008 season opener, Young was hurt against the Jacksonville Jaguars. When it was time to report the next day, Young was nowhere to be found. The team put out a search for him after his disappearance. Distraught from being booed and getting hurt, Young wallowed alone until he finally cooperated with Titans officials to return to the facility. A minor knee injury kept him out for 3 weeks, but despite being healthy, Fisher emphasized that KERRY Collins would be the starter moving forward. With VY on the bench, Collins led the Titans to a 13-3 record. Young wouldn't play the rest of the season. The Titans were upset in the first round of the playoffs by the Ravens. In the offseason, Young was hit with another blow, the tragic death of his pops, Steve McNair. It was one of the defining breaking moments in Young's football career. The dissension between Fisher and Young remained evident, and Collins remained the starter. The Titans had a miserable 0-6 start to the 2009 season. Even then, Fisher didn't want to put Young in the game. Forced by owner Bud Adams, Fisher relented, but not without saying he was still in Collins' corner. Despite the toxic environment, Young brought them back to winning. They won 5 straight games, the first to ever do so after a 6-game losing streak. They finished by winning 8 of the last 10 and narrowly missing the playoffs. A clutch walk-off victory over the Cardinals was the last great moment of Vince Young's career. In 2010, the Titans struggled, and the tension between Young and his head coach came to a head. Young was hurt in a game, and Fisher refused to let him re-enter, despite the injury being able to be played through. A shouting match happened after the game. Young threw his shoulder pads in the stands, and it would be the last time he would get the chance, as the Titans cut him in the offseason. In a poof, it looked like it was all gone, but the issues were boiling. As quickly as Vince Young reached the mountaintop, the mountain seemed to topple on top of him. The death of his mentor, Steve McNair, his problems with Fisher and the Titans' ownership, passion for the game of football gone. Without the drive to be a great NFL quarterback, all the struggles of family and football became too hard to overcome. Young signed as a backup for the Philadelphia Eagles in 2011, but only latched on for 1 year after a disaster performance in relief. His 4-interception game against the Seahawks sealed his fate as an NFL quarterback. He was released after 2 more failed attempts to make a roster, and even a disastrous CFL attempt. Vince Young finally retired. As Young would later say, now he could just be Vincent again. But even Vincent has his problems, and is a great lesson for future pros. Young's lavish lifestyle led to him filing bankruptcy despite making over $64 million in contracts and endorsements in his short career. Young's decision-making spilled over into his post-NFL career job at Texas, where he was eventually fired for inadequate performance. After 2 separate DWI charges in the past few years, it had us wondering what happened to Vince Young. In his Players Tribune article, he lays it all out. He made some mistakes. He had his moments, but he visualized it and got his family, quote-unquote, out. Vince learned he wasn't invincible, and in the end, he's probably gonna be alright. VY was dead, but Vincent could now live. So, there you have it, the story of Vince Young. What was your favorite Vince Young moment? Let me know in the comments down below. If you want to see more videos like this, drop a like and subscribe. And of course, turn on post notifications. As always, you're watching Nonstop Sports. We'll catch you next time.